Roller Nation, welcome to the show. Captain Geeked of the Shrimp Shack Shooters, Gary from Gary from the why am I blanking?
BJJBrick.
Jesus Christ! I need to hit my head with a brick. I just wrote it down. Oh my god!
No biggie. I'll throw some bricks your way, and that way
Yeah, no. Oh man, I'm like 5'7", so my whole life is just bricks. I can't play basketball for shit. Like,
Well, I think that's all I can do. I'm not very good at jiu-jitsu, but actually that's what I originally started as a basketball player. So that's my sport.
Gary, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I want to say that I am personally just a huge fan of your show. I'm not certain that I've listened to every episode, but I am certain I've listened to almost every episode.
Man, that's impressive.
Yeah, well, it's just it's been a really good resource for me. I have to travel for work, and so one of the things that I do is try to find ways to keep my mind in, grappling and the things that I love, while I'm away from home. And so your podcast and a few others have been, kind of central to that. And I've been a big fan of you. And when I found out that you started jiu-jitsu at 35, as did I,
awesome.
I had to learn more about you and hear from you. So for some of my guests, my old rollers who may not be as familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself, quick introduction, and then I got some questions for you because I'm looking into the ghost of Christmas yet to come here.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Old Rollers Podcast, that's what I am. I mean, that's kind of what I'm here for, is to try to get the older people to roll. And like you said, I started 18 years ago, I guess, when I was 35 years old. I watched Hoist Gracie, UFC 1, and I said, I got to do this. I couldn't find a place to train, and finally found a place led by a purple belt. And before really there was jiu-jitsu anywhere here in Wichita, Kansas, or the state of Kansas, but been training since then, nonstop. I haven't really taken any time off, and here I am 18 years later, loving it probably more than my first few years.
Yeah, that's so exciting to hear, because I don't have any fears necessarily of burnout or anything like that, but I do worry a little bit about some of the injury things, and just to hear you say haven't really taken any time off, that's exciting to me. The stated goal of this podcast, for my listeners are probably tired of hearing it, but I always tell our guests, like, this goal is just entirely selfish. I just passed my 40th birthday. Like I said, I started at 35, and I want to roll into my twilight years dangerously.
Awesome.
So I'm trying to basically get advice from coaches, nutritionists, physical therapists, competitors, anybody who has an eye toward skill development and longevity, because I want to be really good at jiu-jitsu, and I want to be really good at jiu-jitsu for a long time. And so hearing you say 18 years later that you're enjoying it more now than you were leading up to this time period, man, that's just such an exciting statement. Like, we could quit the podcast right now because we've
won.
Yeah.
We've basically won in life. Like you said, you're 40 years old. You've been training 5 years. You're looking for longevity. I've been training 18 years. I'm 53 years old. To find a hobby like this that is so good for you, you meet so many people and you have fun. I mean, what else is there? We've got our families. What else is there in life to, as long as we got a smile on our face, we're doing well.
Yeah, this is such a complex life, and I don't know if you have kids, but
yes, I do.
So like once you have kids, like when I was younger, I had this hobby, I had that hobby. I was into golf for a time period. I'm pretty embarrassed about that one. But just anything. I am a fairly curious person, so I would just check this out or check that out. Once you have kids, like, pretty much you get one thing,
Yes.
And that's not a dictate or mandate from my wife. That's just reality, like, there's just not time. So
Definitely real.
I'm so lucky. It was actually my daughter who introduced me to jiu-jitsu sort of by accident. She was doing just a karate kempo when she was about 7. And my wife's family is from Iowa. And knowing that Iowa City, Iowa University, it's kind of one of the meccas for American folk style wrestling. I wanted, if my daughter's into martial arts, I wanted to get her an introduction to what I consider to be the American martial art, which would be wrestling. So I called all these schools, that were like wrestling schools there, and they just had no interest in us whatsoever. And I was willing to pay for private lessons, just for a week while we were on vacation, just to give her, this is what wrestling is, like I'm not trying to make her into an All-American or something. I just wanted her to know what it is. And every one of them said no. And we called a small jiu-jitsu school called Iowa City BJJ, run by Jason Clark. And he said, yeah, 2 of our coaches are wrestled at Iowa University. One was an All-American. And we have a kids program every day at 5:00. Bring her in. We're not even going to charge you. We just want every kid to know about jiu-jitsu. And so just watching him describe the art and the science of leveraging things to these 8-year-olds, I came there with a book. I wasn't trying to learn anything about a martial art, but I just, in the course of this conversation, I was like, whatever this is, that's for me, and it's been that way ever since. I've never had a feeling like, okay, I want to quit. I've never had that sense. It's always just been, this thing is what, I don't feel like I was looking for it. I feel like it was looking for me. Too bad I'm not any good at it,
I have that same feeling. That's awesome. That's one of the things I like so much about jiu-jitsu. Like you said, you called wrestling schools. Nobody really wanted to talk to you. You called Jason Clark, get a hold of Iowa City BJJ. Hey, come on in. We're not even going to charge you. My goal here is I want to teach as many youngsters jiu-jitsu as possible. They're going to get into jiu-jitsu. They're going to get into wrestling. They're going to grow this sport. And, you think of your podcast, my podcast. Well, I'm going to say Byron's podcast because it's not mine. I'm along for the ride. But, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to grow jiu-jitsu. And, we're all there together. And like I said, when I first started, there were no schools in Kansas. There were no black belts in Kansas. We had, 1, 2 schools, the whole state of Kansas. And, now we have one on, every corner, it seems like, which is great. And that's what both you and I want. It's going to be great for our kids. It's going to be great for, everybody on the way up.
You bring up something there that we've heard a lot, especially talking to some of the folks that were kind of like the American OGs, like Mark Kukro and, the head of SBG, Coach Matt Thornton, is that, man, it was hard at first to find anybody, just to find training. And we know now in our era that, just like you said, I live in a small city, Lexington, Kentucky. I can think of 5 schools that I could go to.
That's awesome.
Just like off the top of my head. And there's probably some Gracie garages too that I don't know about. If I really wanted to do some digging, I could find some more. And we have, like back in those days, there was choke points of information. There was no one to train with and no one to learn from. So a lot of it was, just working on your own and maybe a few VHS tapes here and there. Now we sort of have the opposite scenario where we have, a school on every corner, and with YouTube, places like BJJ Fanatics, Stephen Kesting's Grapple Arts, we have this almost information overload, like where you could, whatever technical, sequence or whatever that you think you might be interested in, you can find a YouTube playlist 30 deep of just that one thing, in about 5 seconds. And so I think in the old days, paying your dues was trying to, put everything together, and you almost were doing it on your own. And I wondered, as I got, as I've gone deeper into the sport and the science, like what is my version of paying my dues? Because it's kind of just laid out for me, right? Like there's no, I don't really have to do much to get information. Um, and I think part of it is that now we become curators. We have to take a lot of self-control of our training, because in the past you might have access only to one teacher, and that person was the person who taught you jiu-jitsu. Now it's kind of in your hands. Like, you could learn jiu-jitsu from world champions. You could learn jiu-jitsu from, Gary and Byron. You could learn jiu-jitsu from, the guy around the corner that's whose school you don't go to, but his YouTube channel has a bunch of technique on it. But you have to build a game that makes sense out of that information overload. You have to distill it down into a usable, I would almost say, product that you create for yourself.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there. I can think when I first started, first of all, I said there were very little amount of schools, not many instructors around. I really didn't have access to quality training that these young guys do now. I see these guys coming up now, and they're light years ahead of me. But if I had the information overload, like what we do now, like you said, BJJ fanatics, and think during this COVID situation, everybody was offering free instructionals. I know I
Yep.
got one from Bernardo, I've got one from Tom DeBlas, and
Just amazing, right?
yeah, amazing, just the way these people are giving back. But then I wouldn't have known what to do with all that information. I'm not at that level yet to really know what to look for, to know what to work on. It would have been, I think it would have been information overload, like you were saying. I wouldn't have known, how to figure out my own path. And kind of like what you were saying too, is everybody's got a different game. There's more than one way to have fun doing jiu-jitsu. There's more than one way to win a match. And, my style has changed. Your style is either changed or it's going to change. And
Hopefully I get a style at some point.
yeah. But you find out works better for you. I know one thing we talked about a little bit beforehand was, leg locks. And I didn't pick up leg locks till I was closing in on 50 years old. And most people would think, man, that's kind of crazy to be working leg locks at 50. But for some reason, it fit into my game. It allowed me to play off my back a little bit. And it was almost like a resurgence, because all of a sudden I felt like I was learning jiu-jitsu all over. I mean, I had focused on upper body submissions, upper body control. I had came from that back in the day where everybody said leg locks were bad, leg locks were evil.
Yeah.
You were going to hurt yourself with leg locks. And I shied away from them. Once I started using them, the light just clicked. I just started having so much fun. I felt like I was brand new in jiu-jitsu, and just smiling every time I was out there on the mat rolling.
Something that I've found with the leg game, and this, as an older guy and never very athletic anyway, scrambles are not a tremendous asset of mine. I'm working on developing a better scrambling ability, and I have great wrestling coaches, and I'm learning about finding base and racing to base, and hip switches and hip heists and things like that. But one thing that I found about the leg game was that with good wrestlers, and I have some Division I wrestlers in the school that I train at, leg attacks gave me the ability to win scrambles with them, whereas previously it wouldn't have been even close. There would just never been a chance, not even to win a scramble, but to even scramble effectively. But something about attacking a wrestler's legs, and I don't know what it is yet, I'm working on it, seems to reduce their ability to race to base, so to speak, and to pressure in and win that race to the top. And so that's been a fascinating thing. Right before we had to close, I was really coming to this conclusion where, only if I engaged in a leg attack of some sort did I have a chance if we were scrambling, and it was me and one of the better wrestlers. Whereas with other people, maybe I could, keep up with some, not keep up with others. Against the wrestling guys, it was pretty much a zero-sum proposition, and I was going to be on the losing end of it. But the leg game changed that equation some, and at least gave me an opportunity to win a scramble. Now, whether or not I will, I can't, I'm not yet good enough to say, but I do see a window there to maybe not equalize, but at least create a different playing field, one where the rules don't work the same way.
I like that. One thing I've always said about leg locks, I call them the great equalizer. Like you're saying, you're having trouble with these high level wrestlers winning a scramble. But as you attack their legs, you're in a better position. Maybe you're going to win it, maybe you won't, but you're giving yourself a chance. And that's the one thing I've noticed with leg locks is, I think, there's in the last 4, 5, 6 years, they've, come to the top of the jiu-jitsu chain, especially with no gi taking off. But there's still a lot of people who don't train him and don't really, and if they do train him, they just hit the surface of them. But I really think if you have a really solid leg lock game, you can tap way above your pay grade. And I just love it. I just love the transitions, it just 50% more. I just had 50% more submissions all of a sudden. I had a whole bunch more stuff to learn. And like you said, I feel like people that I couldn't scratch the surface with before, now maybe I can hold my own a little bit. And going back to the age thing, I am slow. I am very, very slow. I'm not like I used to be. And I'm talking what I used to be at 35, which I was probably slow at 35. So, I never got to train this game when I was a young pup and could really move. But, now as I get older, I try to stay closer because I'm never going to win that scramble. I've really been working my wrestling a lot too, probably in the last 5 years, which is another strange anomaly. Here's a guy, 50 years old who I could probably say 60% of my training now is just straight wrestling. And it's another thing I've just fallen in love with. And that's another thing you don't see, normally as you get older, you don't want to train wrestling, but for some reason I'm like you, I fell in love with wrestling. As soon as my son started wrestling, everything just changed. And, I just started following it, reading up on it, watching it. As you're talking, Iowa State, University of Iowa. I'm close to Oklahoma State. So, I go down there and
John
watch
Smith is my guy, man.
Yeah. Yep. I go down and watch a couple duels a year.
Have you seen, there's a seminar that he put on about winning the grip fight in wrestling, where he talks about using underhooks, using overhooks, how each one can win, your wrist ties, your collar ties, each one, what the strengths and weaknesses are. It's like a 35-minute video that was just master, class level. And after I watched that, my whole game kind of changed from that 1 30-minute video. And I've been a John Smith guy ever since.
Yeah, I will definitely look that up. Like you said, underhooks, overhooks, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, and John Smith is a legend. But what you said right there is 1 35-minute video changed the way you've been grappling. And it's kind of crazy. You've been training all this time and you may see something for 35 minutes or 30 minutes, or you have a new black belt who comes in town, gives you a seminar, shows you one thing on the side, and it just changes your game dramatically. And it's, I just love it when I have something like that happen.
Yeah. So I came from an aviation background, and we, by virtue of the training being so expensive, we had to do everything we could to distill and speed the learning curve. Every piece of information that we could get in, we had to make it as small and as usable as possible, because you're paying a lot of money for it, right? That's part of the allure to the BJJBrick podcast. And I'm not here to shill your show, but I will, because it did and it does help me, because your goals are to steepen the learning curve, to accelerate people's early introduction to grappling and get better quickly. And I can say that you guys have helped me. I'm not phoning that one in. I'm being serious. And a lot of the ways of thinking about stuff and things like that have given me the ability to assimilate a game. And I had a little bit of I won't say a learning, difficulty, but I'm definitely like my coach's most specialist student,
That makes two of us.
We joke, it was true in the beginning. The first 6 months, if he wanted me to take my right hand and move it to the left, he would teach the whole class, and then he would look at me and he'd go, "Now, Harrison, I want you to take your left hand and go to the right with it." And I would do that backwards, but I would get it right because he told me wrong to make it right. So I had to build a frame of reference, and shows like yours really did help with that. And that's, I'm hoping that I can, with the Old Rollers podcast, contribute to that same sort of mega mind, the frame of reference and the way to think about things. And I wanted to ask you on the other side, because I'm a new podcaster. I'm less than 50 episodes in. What are some of the biggest takeaways that you've had for your own grappling? Like, so obviously you're doing a show, and every show you're going to get better. That it's perfectly natural. But I know, with the high level people you've talked to, what are some things that have just, come down and just been like, I must carry this with me. Like, I cannot lose this lesson.
I got two things that it seems like every time we talk to some high level person, and it seems like they're brought up a lot. First one is a notebook. And I can honestly say I never kept a notebook. I know, one of those gyms I used to train at is affiliated with Rafael Lovato, and he was really big into notebooks, and they had everybody, having a notebook and writing all the time. And still, that wasn't me. I wouldn't do it. We've had Rafael on the podcast, and we've had numerous other people on the podcast talking about writing in your diary, writing in your notebook, so you don't forget stuff. And because we are going to forget stuff. One thing that really got me is Tim Sled. We've had Tim Sled on a couple times, and he also came to our BJJBrick camp. But what really got me there is when Tim Sled was giving a seminar in our camp, is right before everything started, he introduced himself, introduced what he was going over, but he gave us an outline of what he was doing. And I had never had this happen in a seminar before. He gave us an outline, and he gave us paper, scratch paper, so we could write stuff down. And I think it was at that point that I was like, man, I'm really doing a disservice if I don't start writing stuff down. And I can think of how many times I had learned something and forgot it. If I would have had some notes scribbled down somewhere, and, there's no perfect way to take notes. You're going to put, everybody's got their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, your coach would tell you to do it with your left hand, but you really did it. Yeah. You got your own way. I got my own way. But I think Tim Sled really hammered that home to me. And I seemed like from his seminar, I kept so much. And I've got kind of a gym in my basement, and I've got a little whiteboard, and I've got Tim Sled's pressures of principles, or principal pressures, written right on my whiteboard. That was one of the things he taught that day. It just blew me away. And the other thing is positional drilling. So many, I think sometimes, you're in that class mode. You come in, you do some warm-ups, you go over a move, you drill moves at, 20%, and then you go straight to rolling. And while you're rolling, you may never ever get in a position, that you may want to work on, or that you were just taught. And, so let's say my instructor were working off a front headlock. And if I'm rolling that day and I never get myself in that position, we may have did some really small drilling there for, 15 minutes, but without a lot of pressure. It's totally different without a lot of pressure and going real. So you need to put yourself in that position, and positional drilling is a great way to do it. Or if you have good training partners. And one thing I like to do, if we don't positional drill and we're working on the front headlock, I'm going to give you a crappy shot. I'm not even going to try to take you down. I'm just going to get in that position. So you sprawl on me, get a chin strap, and I'm going to start working from there. Maybe we were working sucker drags that day, and I'm going to try to drag and take your back, or who knows, maybe I'm trying to peek out. Who knows what we're working on. But those are the two things that I had heard from so many high level people. And I look at it, if you get to that level, you've got to be doing something right. And I heard it so many times, those two things. And those are two things I try to tell my young training partners, the people that I get started, especially I always tell them about a notebook all the time. And I got one training partner who hasn't been doing it that long, a couple years. But man, every time, as soon as there's a break in the action, he's over there running back to his notebook and scribbling stuff down. And I have seen his game kind of take off a little bit since he started doing it.
With your mentioning of that, from my own experience, I took notes because once again, I had to travel for work. So I couldn't be there. Like if I came to class on Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I might be out working, so I'll be away from the instructor. And so I would take notes initially just over the techniques. And that really did help. It really got me over that curve where everything was just totally backwards. Eventually I started to make sense of things, But the other thing that my notebook gave me is I started writing down and creating a data set from my rolls. So
awesome.
Where was I getting tapped? Where was I getting passed? What passes were difficult for me to stop, which was all of them. What things were working, how was I able to pass if I ever was? If I wasn't, what things went wrong? And then basically the notebook would tell me what things I needed to train. So if every day I tried to pass everybody's guard on the mat and I didn't do it one time, clearly I have a problem with passing. So I needed to practice that and find a pass that I could work, and then getting further into that, maybe I start having a little bit of success with, say, knee cut passing. And then it would be, well, okay, so the knee cut pass worked today. Oh, but this guy, he stuffed it. He was able to frame against my knee, get his leg back inside, fold back in, and now suddenly I'm stuck. And it was just this game of like us going back and forth until I got swept. So how do I stop that leg pummel? How do I stop that initial frame? And so the quality of my notes would get better as my understanding of my successes and failures got deeper. So initially it was just like, I can't pass. And then it would be like, okay, I'm going to practice knee cuts. Knee cuts worked twice, but 2 other times I got framed out and I don't know how that happened. So how do I beat that? And so the notebook, not only was it a way of keeping techniques, but it was also a way of deciding what to work on and then building within my mind a framework to understand where things were going right and where things were going wrong. And so like if you were to look at my notes 2 years after I started, it would be vastly different the way I took them than at first, because my understanding was so much deeper. Like it might even be the same number of words, but instead of I can't pass, it might be like knee cut wasn't working against frame. You know what I mean? Like knee frame. So the note taking went beyond just the techniques for me. It really helped me to decide on what to work on and then to really make sense of what I was working on over time.
I like that. But going back to what you were first talking about with your job, you're traveling, and going to your Old Rollers podcast here. It just seems like, we're not 22 years old. We're not, in college. We have, as you get a little bit older, it seems like you have more responsibilities. I know you have kids at home. I see you have a dog right there too. Hey,
his name's Woodford.
What's the name?
Woodford.
Hey, Woodford. Yeah. I'm the biggest dog lover ever.
So I named him after my favorite batch of bourbon.
Oh, there you go. But one thing I didn't really think about when we're talking about taking notes is, I'm in the same boat. I have a demanding job. I coach basketball. I have young kids. My daughter is, when I say young, for 53 years old, I have young kids. My daughter's 16 and my son is 13. So, I got sports every day, trying to fit in time to train. It's tough, but I'm going to make that time. But so I can't train, 7 days a week. And even if I could, my body wouldn't hold up But, I think that's another reason, especially, going to your podcast, for us older individuals, being able to go back and, maybe 10 o'clock at night till we finally, have some free time, sit down, pull out our journal, start reading it. And I think you made a good point too, is when you're first putting them in, you're just putting in basic notes, I can't pass, because you really don't know the concepts. You may know the moves, but you're not knowing the concepts behind it. And, you're saying, it's 100 times different than it was when you first started, but 5 years down the road, it's going to be 100 times even better, because this is a sport that we're going to be learning from day one to day, 40 years. We're never going to stop learning. And that's what I love about jiu-jitsu so much. We're always going to be learning as long as we keep an open mind, have fun, ask questions. And, like I always say, we have one mouth, two ears. So listen more than you talk. And if I listen more than I talk, I'm going to learn from everybody. And jiu-jitsu, I don't care who it is. You can be in a competition against a guy that you've fought 4 times, in 4 different tournaments. But if you ask him a question, hey, how did you tap me out? That person's going to show you. Jiu-jitsu is a crazy sport. Like I've never seen such camaraderie between competitors.
Well, it's funny that you say that. We had the good fortune of having Lachlan Giles on the podcast very early on. He was one of our very first episodes.
He's incredible.
And the nicest guy, right? Like just like an absolute prince. And we went through his training cycle, his skill development cycle, and then his competition prep cycle for ADCC 2019, where he made that huge run and
that was crazy.
Just slew all the giants of the open weight division. And I told him beforehand because I wanted to know about it, but I also understood that, hey, he's an active competitor. I said, if any of this is part of your competitive advantage, say so. I won't bring it up. I'm not here. I'm not a journalist. I'm a fan, right? I'm not trying to cause you a problem. If Lachlan Giles wanted to talk about like waxing his car, I probably would want to listen to it.
Yes.
But he laid out the whole thing and just explained the periodization, the thing. And he, his thing was like, well, it was basically Leglocks and wrestling. That's how I felt like the rule set was going to be defined. Like, how was it going to be won? And, he goes, hey, there's no competitive advantage in knowing that. Whoever it is that hears this has got to do the work, so you can know my training cycle and that won't do you a damn bit of good competitively. You've got to go
step out there,
and you could even use the exact same techniques that I do. But if they don't work as well for your body, if you're not finding what your body can do, then it won't matter. So knowing how to periodize and these things like that, those are universal things that'll make us all better, but they won't make anyone a better competitor if they don't do the work.
I love that. That is so spot on. But, going back to you talking about how you had Lachlan Giles on, isn't it crazy how you can send him a message on Facebook or however you reached out to him? Hey, can you come on to my podcast? Sure. It's like, that was the one thing that really, it blew my mind. You can reach out to just about anybody, but could you imagine if we're doing a football podcast and I try to reach out to Patrick Mahomes? Hey, Patrick, would you mind, because Lachlan Giles is the Patrick Mahomes of, jiu-jitsu.
He's definitely one of the top 3, top 5 stars, in the game.
And, they don't even think twice about it. Yeah, I'll come on. But Patrick Mahomes would never get and not that I'm trashing Patrick Mahomes, but you would never get that.
Well, and what's exciting too is the level of enthusiasm that people have, for helping each other, which is, I think, kind of what you're leading to, is that, just like you said, you could ask somebody that just beat you on a competitive mat, hey, how'd you do that? There's a good chance that they'll break it down and show it to you. This sport does have, it's a zero-sum sport. If I win, I killed you. And if you won, you killed me. And yet it is very not zero-sum in the culture of it. And that's a hard thing to kind of, coalesce and put together. But I think there's also some beauty to that. And it's really, it's really taught me a lot. Going to, I came from a business background previously, and I had some businesses that did well, had some businesses that didn't, but I always felt like everything was basically cutthroat. I'm out, like my competition, if I'm not out to beat them, they're out to beat me. And within the business world, I sold real estate for a while, and I had a training talking about abundance mentality. And one of the things that they said was someone else doing good business is not you doing bad business. There's enough business for all of us. And the better that we do, the more buyers and sellers in this case will be interested in working within the market. If we're all out here slashing each other's throats, we create an environment where the buyers and sellers, they're going to sense that, and they're going to say, it's kill or be killed out here. And that actually makes the market not work well because people don't negotiate in good faith. And so that abundance mindset that I kind of learned in a way from real estate, I see this as it's just a cultural element. Like, we don't explain this to each other. It just seems to happen within this sport. Whereas in real estate, like, it had to be, taught,
Well, I never really heard that before. What'd you call it again? What was the name of it?
Call it an abundance mindset, meaning
Abundance
that,
mindset.
yeah.
And
So a scarcity mindset is what is mine can't be yours, and what is yours can't be mine. An
okay.
abundance mindset says what is yours, and that's great. And I can create something for me too.
Yeah.
There's a market for all of us.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me when jiu-jitsu was coming up, when I first started training, and there wasn't a lot of schools around, and cross training was kind of forbidden, and
Mm-hmm.
the sport really wasn't growing. Cross training was, it was forbidden, but now it seems like all the gyms are working together. I can think of, there's this guy that I've trained with. He's got a school out in Joplin, and he hooks up with like five or six different schools, Joplin, Missouri, and they have a David Lopez, I think that's his name. He runs Fuji tournaments, but um, they run every Sunday an open mat between like five or six kind of rural schools out there, and they just rotate. And I think that's incredible, and just the way they all get along. And same thing here in Wichita. It used to be, the schools. If you were in one school, it was almost like you were in a gang, and these gangs didn't want to cross each other's turf. And now, everybody's getting together for open mats, and just you see somebody out and you just talk to them, and it's a whole different story. And now jiu-jitsu is growing, and it kind of reminds me of like what you were talking about there, the mindset, the abundant mindset.
Yeah, that's and like I said, I started, only 5 years ago, so probably on the backside of that wave.
Yes.
And so I didn't experience the sort of, we got secrets and our tribe versus your tribe. Now it's all kind of pretty close to it's one tribe. Now there is some, delineation of things, but it's certainly a lot more open than it has been in the past, as best as I understand it.
Yeah, and it's just going to lead to that learning curve, we were just talking about. The more people you can train with, the more different styles you can see, the more knowledge you're exposed to, as long as we don't do that overload that we were talking about. I'm going to learn quicker. I'm going to get better faster. And as that helps me or helps you, it's going to help everybody in your school. Your school is going to get better quicker. My school is going to get better quicker. And it's just great for the community.
I took a creativity course from the University of Stanford. It was an online course taught by a premier world expert in creativity theory. Unfortunately, I'm blanking on her name. I'm in the middle of a keto diet, so I'm just a little bit foggy at the moment. But one of the things, two things that really gave me that I've applied in my jiu-jitsu. The first was the concept of the reframe. And Elio Gracie was the ultimate reframer. He decided that winning for a smaller, weaker person was just not losing, because in nature, the smaller, weaker person always loses in a fight. So if you could just survive it, then you won if you were the smaller, weaker person. So that was just a pure reframe. And then the second thing that I really carried from that, and I've used it in my life ever since, was that when we have two ideas. So I have a frame of reference. You have a frame of reference. We both like leg locks, right? If I had a roll with you, the way I do leg locks is going to be a little bit different than the way that you do. And each of us may find things within what the other one's doing that could make us better. And within creativity theory, they call that ideas evolve sexually. Now, obviously, ideas aren't out there like banging in a crazy orgy or nothing. What it is that as my idea bounces off yours and your frame of reference, we just created an evolution. Like maybe the way I deal with outside ashi is slightly different than what you do, and the way that you finish from outside ashi is slightly different than what I do. And each of us could then look at that and say, oh, well, his finish is more efficient than mine. My entanglement's slightly more efficient than his and harder to escape. Put the two together, now we have something that is even better. We've evolved that technical conundrum, if you will, or
Yes.
technical solution. So I having come from that class, I didn't have like this sense of zero sum when I'm losing. It sucks. I mean, like, I feel it emotionally. I don't like to lose. But if someone caught me with something, then I would say, oh, well, that's interesting. I would reframe it so that it would be like, it's not just I suck. It's that person did good, right? Abundance mentality. Them doing good is not me doing bad. Great job. But then that was interesting. The way that you put me in that guillotine, I honestly thought I was safe there. What did you do? Now suddenly, not only have I upped the possibility of my guillotine defense, but I also might have gotten a better guillotine. So I may have improved two ways here just by, instead of being frustrated at this loss, saying, oh, well, good job. That was awesome what you did. Now, how did that happen? What did you do? And then I may have something that's like, oh, well, one of the things that I do to shut this particular thing down is just this grip that I have. And so I will then accidentally pass on an idea to them, and all those ideas will coalesce and evolve. And the whole sport does that. That's not just like among me and you. That's everybody. That cross-pollination is just always happening.
My favorite thing is when I'm rolling with some of my training partners that I roll with all the time. They get to know your game. And like you were just talking about, hey, I defend this with this grip I use. And that's what makes this sport so fun. So all of a sudden, let's just go with Kimura. My Kimura is working left and right. I'm hitting it whenever I want. But then all of a sudden, my main training partner, figures out a way, to either get his elbow back to the mat or just some way to mess me up. Then I have to go and reconfigure after we've already talked to each other what you're doing. I now have to figure out how to get my offense back so that I can finish it, so I can get to the position. Then next thing I know, I've changed my game around a little bit. I've maybe done a new grip, maybe get a different position. And next thing I know, I start hitting Kimuras again. Then it's up to my training partner, hey, to talk to me, find out what I'm doing, reverse engineer, figure out what he can do. And like you said, it just keeps going and going. And it's not just me and my training partner. It's our gym. It's the city of Wichita. It's the Midwest, United States. It's the whole United States. It's the whole jiu-jitsu community. And, this sport is just evolving like crazy. And, I know when I first started, jiu-jitsu and wrestling were kind of separate. And, jiu-jitsu, we'd hear, wrestling is nothing, and wrestlers would say jiu-jitsu is nothing. But I think if you want to be a complete jiu-jitsu artist, you better learn wrestling. You better be able to get somebody to the ground. I used to, have this terrible idea that, hey, I didn't care if I get taken to the ground because that's where I want to be. That's where I'm going to submit you. But it's not fun. Ended up on the bottom all the time against somebody who can really hold top position. And so, I've got to work on my game. And you start combining jiu-jitsu and wrestling, and I don't care. We'll take Aikido. We'll take Muay Thai. You're gonna, if you keep an open mind, you're gonna learn stuff from all these arts. And I used to hate it when I hear people just talk about how jiu-jitsu is the best, and all these other arts are worthless. And I think sometimes if you have that mentality, it's going back to kind of what you were taking. We're not, learning. We're not continuing evolving. You have to keep an open mind. You have to learn from everybody we can. Some of it's pure garbage. Find out what's garbage, throw it away. It doesn't work. And I like to see stuff that works. And I hate it when some of these moves just seem. I watch some of these videos and they're just garbage. And they're not going to work against anybody who hasn't been shot with a tranquilizer. And so
you can do that.
Yeah. Hey, how do you think I win?
You're
like
giving
you
me
said.
a lot of ideas here.
Yeah. Hey, I'm competitive like you. I'm going to find a way.
Well, what you said there, some of it is garbage. Evolution is messy. Sometimes you'll go down a rabbit hole and it's a bad one, but that's a necessary process to get to the good one. And we see this with the self-defense sport jiu-jitsu kind of separation or debate. You and I both like Leglocks, bringing it to that. A lot of people thought for the longest time that Leglocks in MMA, well, that's a good way to get your face smashed into the bottom of the cage. And they were right, because the way people did Leglocks was not angular. It was not intelligent. It did not have a positional hierarchy, and it did not maintain or try to advance position. It was infunctional. But over the course of the last 5, maybe 10 years, and earlier than that, starting with say guys like Imanari and Aoki, who really discovered that if you spun off to an angle, you were a lot harder to hit. And then if during that spin you could get the person down, then you became a lot harder to hit and you could break their leg on the fall. So the willingness for, we'll say, sport jiu-jitsu, or in this case, sport grappling, because, gi jiu-jitsu doesn't have a lot of leg locks, to let that technique category or class evolve, allowed it to leave the combative area, MMA or self-defense jiu-jitsu, and just evolve on its own, and then eventually come back and be reapplied and applicable within, the intelligent means of self-defense or MMA jiu-jitsu, being on angles, being willing and able to come to the top position, using leg locks as a means of changing positions as opposed to quote unquote falling to a leg lock. So for a time period, just like you said, some of it was garbage. It was. I mean, how many times we watched Dan Henderson, someone would try to put him in like a reaping leg lock, and he would do that goofy slow turn, and then the H bombs come, Oh my God, it was terrifying to watch, right? And clearly not good, because he wasn't even moving fast. He was just doing a slow turn, like a freaking, like giant troll, just like, and he's pulling back his glove, like just tightening his glove up, because it's like, as soon as I get back around, you're going to eat this. And so people were right to say, hey, this isn't working, but they were wrong to say it can't work. And
good point.
The evolution on its own, like isolated away from punches, allowed it to find a combative, friendly way. So I think that the way guys like Riley Bodycomb, some others, a lot of the Danaher boys and girls, they use leg locks in a way that accentuates or helps their sweeping to change position, and then doesn't ignore the positional game. Like if I've seen Oliver Taza's saddle instructional from the Grapple Arts, and he talks probably 35% of that is passing and back taking, and so it's falling directly within the positional hierarchy of jiu-jitsu, and therefore the combative hierarchy of jiu-jitsu. But it had to go through its time period of not being combatively effective, the same way that wrestling in a way could had a time period where it wasn't that great, and then all of a sudden wrestlers were pretty darn tough to deal with.
Yeah, like you said, everything just evolves. You got your sport, you add it on, but going back to leg locks there in MMA, like I'm telling you that probably one of my favorite fights I ever watched was Ryan Hall against Gray Maynard. And, I just love watching Ryan Hall fight. And, if you go to a bar, you're going to hear some of these people just complaining, hey, what's this guy going for an Inamari roll? He's on the ground. But like you said, Ryan Hall, he does not take punches. He does not get hit. He's so darn intellectual. He's one of the most intelligent guys I've ever talked to. But he he's not going to get hit. He's taking you into his game. He's bringing you into his game. He's going to frustrate you, and then he's going to break your leg. And on top of that, he's got some great kicks. He's built that game for his body, for his game, and he is my favorite person to watch. And like right now, he can't get anybody to fight him. His style's so unique. He's built his game that works perfect.
Yeah, and he's another person who has taken things that people said are not meant to work in MMA and made an MMA self-defense case for them. Leglocks, deep half guard.
Yeah.
I have his modern half guard and the modern 50-50. I basically have everything he ever made. I'm a total Ryan Hall fanboy.
I would have thought that you are very intellectual just the first day I've met you is here today, just from hearing you talk. And Ryan Hall is the same way, just very intellectual people.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm just an old hillbilly, but his DVDs were another thing. Like I said, kind of with your show, it helped me to have a frame of reference where I couldn't be there with my coach all the time. If you're with your coach 5 days a week, they're giving you these little bits and pieces of how to build, how to make the game make sense. And I was unlucky in that, my job requires that I just don't have that. So I had to build it. And Ryan Hall had a huge impact on that for me. Things like in the arm triangle. If you don't trust the pin of your arm triangle, your katagatame, then you don't have an arm triangle. Like your arm triangle, the guy on the bottom should be suffering, and you should be administering that suffering effortlessly because the pin is what's working. It's not you. It's the pin in the position. And that was another thing, just like the John Smith thing that I just took with me. It's like, if I have you in a position and I believe in that position, it should be effortless. If it's not, I'm probably wrong. But he lays out a case for deep half guard in MMA on his DVD, and I don't know if I should give it away because obviously he's trying to sell it, but I can say that when he says this, and it's like just a 15-second sentence, I was embarrassed that I hadn't thought of it. You know what I mean? It was just why didn't I? Yes. Obviously that's true. Why didn't I ever put that together? How dumb does this old hillbilly have to be that he can look at that 10,000 times and never make this obvious connection? Sun come up in morning, sun go down in evening.
The crazy thing is what you're saying right there. I had this same thing with Ryan Hall. I'd been probably training 8 years. At this point, I was a Kimura person. Seems like I only do 2 moves, a Kimura and a Leglocks. But
yeah, buddy.
That's all I do. It's I'm predictable. He was talking one time, and he was talking about how as you push your hand in, the elbow comes away from the body. And he's like, you're always if you want to get a Kimura, get a grip, you want to push that hand in, the elbow comes away from the body. And it was so simple, but it's something I never thought of. I was always like, okay, I need to dig in here and grab it and use, hey, I need to use power. I need to, hey, He-Man strength. But, it was just something, it made so much sense, but I never looked at it at that level. And as soon as I figured that out, every time, I'd be standing and I'd grab wrist control, I would just mess around with it. I just push the hand right to the body. And I was like, oh, wait, there's a Kimura. And then I'd grab a Kimura grip and, fall to half guard or whatever to finish it. But it's funny that you said that because I had the same epiphany, just one thing that Ryan Hall said. And he is one of the people who shaped my game because when he doesn't just show a move, he talks so much about the concepts, the visualization of everything, and the way he talks, it makes sense to me. And everybody's got somebody that is going to make sense to you.
Yep.
You may be somebody else, but for me, Ryan Hall was that first person who I could watch his videos and they really made sense.
I definitely put him in that category for myself as well. And it's so funny too, because in his early videos, I think he was still a purple belt when he was making them, and just a young guy,
Yeah.
And like I said, embarrassing to me that I couldn't make these obvious connections, because once he said it, it was like, well, yeah, it's like,
But that's the great thing about you doing a podcast. How many people you're going to talk to, and like that question you asked me here a little bit ago, you're going to pick up so much just by listening to these people. These people, you've had Lachlan on. These people. As long as you just ask some questions and just sit there and go along for the ride, you are going to hear some amazing stuff that is going to help your game while you're not on the mat. And then you're going to bring that on the mat. It's going to elevate your game. It's going to elevate your training partner's game. And it's just going to make your school that much better.
It's already happened. I can even say this on behalf of my instructor. Some of the people that I've had on the show, he does recap shows with me about every 10 episodes.
Okay.
And we kind of go through what were the high points of, what each person had to say, and what were, some things that everyone said, like obviously these things are important. What are the consensus and stuff like that? And, we had a talk, and some of the stuff when we get to open back up post COVID, some of our class structure is going to be changing based on the information that we've gleaned from these high level coaches and physical therapists and stuff. And my diet is different because of an episode we had with Dr. James Escaloni, who's a physical therapist. And he said that if we keep our blood sugar down, our ligaments and tendons will remain more supple for longer. So
Which is what we need.
Right. Direct longevity for what we do. So he said his advice is that if that's your goal, eat a pound of vegetables every day. And he's like, it's just damn hard to eat a bunch of shit after that. So it's like, if you eat a pound of vegetables, that's not going to be hard on your blood sugar. And good luck filling up on a bunch of garbage after you've eaten a pound of vegetables throughout your day, so just simple things like that. Some of the things I do in my workouts are different. We had Tom Corey on, who started at 65
Awesome.
and he's a badass brown belt at 72. And the guy does standing ab wheel extensions at 72 years old.
Jeez.
His resting heart rate at 72 is 37 beats per minute.
Unbelievable.
And so he completely changed my standards of what I'm up to, and what not only what my strength conditioning and workouts need to be, but also what my idea of longevity was. Because I thought, rolling into 65 would be great. This dude starts at 65 and is dangerous as hell at 72. So he gave me, just out of the gate, that's 7 years, to think about going further in this thing that I love, So it's already happened. It's such an amazing. That's another reason why I wanted to have you on the show, is like to kind of get an idea from the other side after 300 some episodes, because I aspire to that as well.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I just had a little computer issue.
I saw the lights get dim for a second there.
Yeah, I didn't realize I didn't have it plugged in, so I apologize for that.
Don't apologize, man.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sorry. I missed your last question there. I apologize.
All I was saying is that it's truly exciting to be able to talk to you on the backside of over 300 episodes, because like I said, I'm starting that journey.
Yeah.
And I think I'm at 30. So I'm doing actually better than I thought I might. Like I kind of thought like maybe people just won't talk to me and then that'll be it. but at least people have been willing to talk to me. And, but it's already changed my way of life. It's embarrassing in a way to say that, but at 40, I was looking for that, and I found it through this, which I didn't really expect, but I'm trying to be super grateful and really, like I can say this, like if you haven't seen the Tom Corey episode,
I'm watching it after you told me about
dude, he changed my whole way of thinking about things. Like, because he was just like, yeah, I'm 72. And, he's like, the guy does 5-minute closed guard holds on a heavy bag where he'll lock his legs around a heavy bag and do sit-ups for 5 minutes. And then he wanted to work on his hooks, like to make his, like more active toes in his hooks.
Yep.
So he started hanging himself upside down from his squat rack by his toes, like, from the top of his foot.
Awesome.
And would do toe touches that way. And the guy's not young. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
So it was just like, okay, Harrison, you got to up your freaking standards. Like, this is, if you come out of this conversation the same way that you entered it, that is going to be a tremendous shame, and good luck looking your son in the eye. You know what I mean? Like,
well, that's like my goal. That's why I love your podcast, geared towards older individuals. And, I first started this sport, and to be honest, I figured I'd train for maybe 10 years. I didn't know I would catch the jiu-jitsu fever, and, I caught it, and, I kept telling myself I'm going to train. As I've got older, I've noticed my body doesn't perform like it did when I was 35, when I was 45, when I was 50. But I am a much better grappler right now, today, than I was yesterday. My 53-year-old self would destroy my 50-year-old self, would destroy my 45-year-old self, would destroy my 22-year-old self. But you have to listen to these guys like Tom Corey, and, you have to take that knowledge, the guy you were just talking to about the vegetables, about the ligaments. If I want to keep training this sport till I'm 72, and my goal, I plan on training this sport till I pass away. I really want to be in my 80s, 90s training this sport. I'd love to be the first guy. I don't know if there's ever been, but I would love to be the first guy over 100 to be on the mat. I think that'd be awesome. But for me to get there, I have to do exactly what you were just talking about. I have to research. I have to listen to people. I have to, guys like that Tom Corey have paved the way for people like me and you. If we don't listen to his advice, we lost. Like you said, we have to look our kids in the eye and say, hey, here I am. I can't train anymore because I didn't take this person's advice. I can't train anymore because I haven't been watching Old Rollers podcast and getting all that good information. So, but you were talking about, the BJJBrick podcast, trying to flatten the learning curve. We're trying to help the first year, people quit in the first year. We're trying to grow that jiu-jitsu. You're doing the exact same thing. You're taking the other side of it, taking the people who are a little bit older, the seasoned grapplers, trying to keep them going, so they don't quit. I mean, our two segments that we're kind of geared towards are the easiest ways to drop out. At my age, I've got a good chance of getting hurt and, not being able to come back on the mat. I do watch who I train with now, where before I used to train with anybody. I like to just train with higher level people. It just keeps me a little bit more safe. But these younger guys, to keep them coming, we have to train a little bit differently. I have to welcome them to the gym all the time. It's, I can't just, back in my day, it seems like I just got beat up when I walked into the gym. Nobody knew any different. But now I'm going to work with that person. I'm going to let them get position. I don't have an ego. I'm going to let them tap me out. I'm going to tell them what they did good. You talked about what else have I learned? And I don't remember who told us this, but I thought this was a great piece of advice. And I've given it to my wife, who's a teacher. But somebody said, for every time I criticize one of my students, I make sure I give them 5, positive reinforcements. And just something little like that, I just thought was incredible. It's another thing that, how did I not know this? How, like, you were saying earlier, like, when we were talking about Ryan Hall, how did that never come into my mind? let's correct them, show them what they did wrong, but let's give so much positive reinforcement to keep them in the sport, to keep them happy. And when you see that smile on their face, because you just said something nice, pat on the backs go a long way.
You remind me of something that I actually had kind of forgotten about and maybe didn't appreciate it for what it was. We had a newer guy come in. He's one of our police officers. We have a lot of police officers that train in the class that I train with.
Awesome.
And we're very fortunate on that. And the Blue Jitsu guys, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but 2 of the 3 of them actually train in my gym. And
awesome.
They have a great seminar series, and they're coming out with an instructional series for police officers based on their real life experiences and also MAT experiences. But he was young, kind of came from like a CrossFit background, like definitely not a big fan of losing, especially to kind of a doughy, slow, 40-year-old.
Us typical jiu-jitsu guys.
Yeah, and so every roll with him would be kind of like this all-out war, and for a while I would be like passing his guard and like or sweep him or something, and then I would try to talk to him, because I can just, how like when you see those race horses race and their nostrils are just flaring, like and you can hear it, like like that's what he sounded like. And so I would just be like, hey man, is everything, how's things going, in Copland? Obviously I'm not a police officer, so I don't know, it's like, and this is clearly a difficult time to be a police officer.
Yes.
But over the course of like 6 months, he started to chill out, and we had this role the day that I was promoted to purple belt. And it was just a complete exchange. It wasn't, it wasn't just this fight and super grip battle and, everything is just completely tense. It was just this exchange. And we both got promoted that day. And after the roll was over, this was before any of that happened, I was like, hey man, that was your best roll. You lost a few on that one, but I can feel you trying to find technique solutions as opposed to just trying to just squeeze on everything. And so I was like, you're going to find that your learning curve is about to, skyrocket. And that was he got a stripe that day, and I actually got promoted that day. And like a week later, I talked to him. He's like, you don't know how much that meant to me. And I was like, man, I was just saying it because it was true. I wasn't trying to, say anything like, oh, I'm awesome, or, like I know anything about you, or I can make your day. I was just like being truthful. It's like, hey man, that was the way that you're going to get better, is rolling like that. Because if I can have this exchange with you, I don't mind losing to you. I don't love it, but I'll live, but we'll both get better from this kind of roll. Whereas if we just squeeze and, like try and stop everything and basically spend 5 minutes stalemated, like we just wasted 5 minutes, you know?
Yep. Going back to what you're saying, those are my favorite roles. I love the give and take. We're not just squeezing. We're not, grabbing onto something with all our strength and just holding there. But also too, it allows me to keep training safely as I get older, where I was just talking, I like to train more with higher level people. I can have a very, very hard match with a high level person, and we can go for an hour, and I'll come back the next day and don't feel sore at all.
Yeah.
And those are as I've got older, those are the ones that are allowing me to keep going, allowing me to get better and stay on the mats. Because the only way I'm going to get better is staying on the mats, and I have to take care of this body. Make it sound like I got something special, but but I got to make sure I stay injury free. And the last thing I want is a neck problem, shoulder problems, knee problems. I want to train healthy. I want to train safely.
And what you said there, it reminds me, we all know that we have that one or two partners that it's just like, it's such a joy to roll with them. And It just, if you were standing watching and you didn't know the two, it would look like a war. Like it would look like they're just trying to tear each other's heads off. But I have two partners like this where we'll wind up giggling. Like it's just like two kids, you know, like just roughhousing. And we had Rob Bernanke on the show, and he said that it's obvious that those are the roles that you have the most your intellectual peak, like your ability to learn is at its peak right there. So his goal was to try and figure out a way to codify that so that you could have an experience at least similar to that with everybody. And so he created a game series called Fuck Your Jiu-Jitsu, where they basically handicap one another in you know, like situational sparring.
Yeah.
So let's say they have a passing situational sparring where the guard player has to hold on to 2 tennis balls and can't make grips. And the passer can't sprawl or induce pressure. It has to only be movement-based passing. Like they can make grips, but they can't lock anything down with them. And so it just creates like this, it's not scrambly, but it's movement-based, you know, jiu-jitsu. And whoever wins, whoever loses, you're both handicapped. It doesn't matter. Like there's no zero sum there because like, what am I going to do? Like, oh, I passed Gary's guard today. Oh yeah, he was holding 2 tennis balls, like big deal. Yeah. So I'm going to learn more about guard passing and movement-based passing. You're going to learn a ton about guard retention. And along the way, whoever gets the better of the other, we've goofified the scenario so much that there can't be this emotional, you know, context to it.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I know we talked about positional sparring, you know, we're not using the tennis balls, which I think is a great idea, or the not sprawling or putting pressure on. But that's one thing I like about positional sparring too. You know, I do think a lot of times ego gets in the way of your learning. You know, if I fight every match as a death match, and oh, by the way, just so you know, my record is 14, 19, and 3 in matches to the death, just so you guys know. But, you know, if we do everything to the death match, I'm not going to learn. You know, I need to open up. I need to lose that ego. But the one thing I do like about positional sparring, even if somebody does have a little bit of ego, you can justify, hey, I got beat because this guy is already starting with a, you know, single leg on the, you know, head on the inside. And it makes it a little bit easier for somebody to take it. And I know when I first started, I fought everything like a death match. I didn't want to lose. And when I did lose, I'd get mad. You know, I mean, I wouldn't show it. I wouldn't cuss. But inside, I'm like, you know, hey, you know, I came from a background. I wanted to win. And now I'm at that background. It's like, man, I love it when I get tapped. Like it's the best thing. And not that I'm trying to get tapped, but I look at it every time I get tapped, I've got something to learn. You know, I made some type of mistake. And I think before jiu-jitsu, I had never had that. If I lost at something, you know, I sulked, I lost. Now I'm like, hey, I didn't lose. I learned. I now take this as, hey, I've got, you know, I'm not perfect. I need to figure out what happened, and let's reverse engineer this. Let's troubleshoot and figure out what I can do better. Maybe I needed to frame better. You know, maybe as I popped up, you know, I raised my chin. Who knows what happened, but I need to figure it out. And if I'm learning, I'm winning. I don't care what the score is. I don't care how many times I get beat. If I'm learning and I'm smiling, I got to have fun. You know, if I'm doing those two things, it's a win. I can't ask for anything else.
I certainly feel the same way. It's interesting in terms of the context of this conversation. This podcast is very much an exercise that has been informed by jiu-jitsu, in that I didn't really have that. Once again, like going back to aviation, that was the frame of reference that I have is coming from that. And it's so expensive that you really can't afford to fail much, you know, like,
yep.
And then once you get to a certain level, you can't fail at all. Like, as an airline captain now, if I fail a check ride, I only get to fail one more, and then I don't have my job anymore. You know, that's just no longer an option. So I had in my mind this idea of, you know, like individual failures are a real problem. And jiu-jitsu detrained that for me. It really, because I was so bad. Like if I was going to survive it, and here's the deal, I might have quit in the beginning.
Yeah.
I was told by somebody, hey, look, this is going to be really hard. So don't do something that won't allow you to quit. So I actually paid on day one for a year of training. I paid
Awesome.
the whole year.
Yep.
Because I'm being a dad, but also just being like kind of a tightwad. If I spend money on something, I'm gonna do
it.
That's gonna happen. So I would, same as you, I would get mad but I was just losing so much. It was just nothing but losing. It was like, if I don't figure out a way to survive this, it's going to be a real problem.
I just spent a lot of money.
So I would have to find like just the smallest victories. Like, oh, my buddy, and he'll know who he is. He would guillotine me, 10 times in a 5-minute round. Oh, today it got me 9 times, but I made him switch to, like a Kimura. So that was a win because he didn't get me with the 10th guillotine. I forced him to move on, like.
I did the exact same thing. I remember this guy would just beat me up so much, but I'd be like, okay, I got a hook in. Like, I mean, it was as bad as I got a hook in, a butterfly hook, and that would be my win. And I would just be like, man, this is great. And then maybe next time, or it wouldn't be next time, it'd be like next month, maybe I got the hook in twice, I mean, but you have to take those little steps. I mean, each step just keeps adding up, and pretty soon we're halfway up Mount Everest. But it's the sport is so humbling, especially when you first start, like what you were saying. I just remember getting tapped left and right. And I guess I'm kind of, I don't quit stuff, and I'm determined. And I just told myself one day I want to be like these guys, because I just thought they were all assassins. I was like, how can you do this to me? And, like you said, half of them look like these doughy guys that, didn't look like anything.
I wish my class was like that, but it's all like these, yoked out cops and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's like they don't look like me at all.
Yeah. Yeah. But,
Bastards.
I just remember looking at some of these guys, and I was like, oh, I'm sizing myself up before. I was like, oh, I'll take this guy easily. Next thing you know, within 5 seconds, I'm tapping,
Yeah.
And then the guy's so nice. He's, hey, you okay? And we slap hands again. And next thing I know, I'm tapping. And
he's buying you a burrito and talking about his job as a software engineer.
Yeah. He's reading a book while he's on top of me, not even working.
Yeah, no. And the survival mechanism of being willing to take the smallest victories, even absurd victories, is literally, I think, what saved me. And that reframe, if I wasn't able to reframe and find the smallest victories, I wouldn't have done it. I would have had to have quit just mentally, to survive it. And it's been the same thing with the show, because this has been, a definite learning curve. I've had just about every IT issue that you can have. I've had Dropbox delete like 12 episodes and had to find them. We started with Lachlan Giles and Joel Bain episodes, 2 of my biggest heroes, that I had to just completely delete because the app that I was using to record it desyncsed desynchronized the conversation, and it sounded like we were just talking on top of each other. And to their credit, and such gentlemen, I will never, ever be able to thank them enough. They both came back on the show.
Awesome.
And I was just completely embarrassed and ashamed to even ask,
Yeah.
And it very much was a white belt thing. And I just told them, I was like, hey, look, I'm a white belt at this. I'm trying. And they were like, hey man, shit happens. So we can talk again.
Yeah. Well, our website got hacked, and somebody put a porn site on our website one time. That was kind of our claim to fame.
Nice.
But you want to know the best thing is first of all, when we first started, I have to say Byron runs all this. I just show up to talk. So I can't take any credit, but we had so many of our listeners.
Screw that guy. it's your show. I'll say it.
Hey, I like you, but we had so many listeners help us out. They'd be like, hey, the sound isn't that great. Have you thought about this? And, we'd sit there and talk back and forth, and, they would just help us out for free. Same thing with, when our website got hacked, we had people helping us out, and it's just unbelievable. The amount of knowledge, you take your gym, the amount of different knowledges that you have at that gym to give you a hand if you got something going on. And it's just the community. The jiu-jitsu community is just unbelievable.
And what you said there actually leads me to something I'm going to ask my listeners to help me get some guests because there's probably about the same number of guests that we've had that I have in my mind of people to get. But eventually, it's not just like sphere of influence or like who could I talk to. It's just like who would I know about is not much bigger than that. So I'm thinking like 100 guests is probably about as far as I can go in terms of like just who do I know to even ask. So we've already had one guest submission, or actually two. We had Brian Peterson, and I just had him on. He's a Pedro Sauer black belt. This freaking keto flu is killing me. He's a wrestler. He lives in Salt Lake. Why am I stuck on his name? Either way, it was a listener that said, "Look, my coach has some great ideas on longevity, and you need to talk to him." And so we had him on, and they were right.
Yep.
Just genius level, black belt level stuff. And Chris Wells, whew. Sorry, Chris, if you watch this show, I apologize. So to my listeners, simple things like and share and subscribe. Obviously, I'm going to ask you to do that. That does help. But also, shoot me a message and say, hey, this person has some ideas that have helped me. I'm even going to ask you, Gary, like, who are some people that have influenced you in these regards and people to reach out to? Because it also helps if like somebody was mentioned on the show, then, I can say, hey, look, Gary said you had some great ideas on this, and I'm perfectly willing to name drop. Like,
yeah. And we did the same thing. We would ask our guests, hey, have somebody, tell us your coach or one of your training partners. And then we'd also do the same thing, like you said, especially when we were first starting, we'd always ask the guest, hey, do you have anybody that you think might be a great talk for us? And it's easier to get in that way too. It's like, hey, Rolly Delgado told me to get in touch with you, or, it just makes it a little bit easier. And, still every now and then you'll get some people who don't want to be on, and I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But it makes it a lot easier. But the coolest thing is, as a listener of your show, you can have input to the Old Rollers podcast by, saying, hey, this person would be a great guest. And how cool is that? We're talking about, if we did a football podcast, would be able to get any of those guys on? No. But how cool is like somebody can be listened to your podcast and have input to who the next guest is. I think that's what makes your podcast, unique and why people would want to listen to it. You're going to listen, you're going to take advice. You're going to ask the people who watch your show, hey, give me your ideas.
Yeah. I mean, we're now an hour and 20 minutes into the show. If somebody's listening at this point, they clearly care about skill development and longevity.
Yeah.
So they probably have some people that have influenced them. So if you're out there listening right now, like, don't be shy, reach out to old H Money and, help me. Because I'll if somebody comes on that has great ideas, I want to hear them. It's going to help me. It's not this is a selfish endeavor. Chris Wells, another one. We were talking about the idea of people who have changed my game. That conversation with Chris Wells, because he has such a sneaky hybridization of jiu-jitsu and wrestling, changed my way of thinking about how to integrate the two. And he's always looking for ways that he can wrestle a jiu-jitsu guy or jiu-jitsu a wrestler, because whatever they're doing, there's a good chance they're probably pretty good at it. But if they have some innate responses that are built based on their practice and their habituation. So we can take advantage of that by giving them a response that is different from their expected one.
Yes, definitely.
So like I said, that's changed and deepened my understanding of how to integrate jiu-jitsu and wrestling. And I wouldn't, I probably wouldn't have come to that conclusion without that talk. And that's directly from a guest, submission.
You think every week or however often you put on a show, you're going to just pick up knowledge like that all the time. You may have the wrestler on, I know we had we had Adam Wheeler on. I think we've actually had him on twice. He was a Greco wrestler on the Olympic team. But you know what killed me is I remember him talking in high school, like I think his like first year or 2 years, he didn't win a match. And here's this guy, you know, it's just incredible, you know, how much time and energy and, you know, how hard he worked to get to that position. And you can't help but be inspired when, you know, you talk to somebody like that. It reminds me of when I was a little kid and I would watch a Rocky movie. And as soon as the Rocky movie was over, I'd go down the basement and I'd grab my Joe Weider weight set and I'd start doing, you know, 30-pound bench presses and some sit-ups. And like after I get done listening to some of these guys, I get so fired up that it's like, hey, I want to go train. Wait, I just got done with this. It's 12 o'clock at night. Well, I'm going to go run around the block. You know, it's I just get so inspired to listen to them.
I experienced that listening to your show and some others, you know, some of your guests, like Ryan Hall's been on a couple of times. Same thing. I just always, Matt Thornton, we actually brought him on this show because when I listened to him on your show, I was like, this guy's a genius. Like
he's incredible.
I've got to hear, you know, this guy's ideas on longevity and how to train for skill and longevity. And, you know, so that came directly from your show, like the Matt Thornton one. I mean, I just, as I listened to him, I went way down a Matt Thornton rabbit hole after the episodes of his that I listened to, and just a brilliant guy. And if anybody is new to this show, like just go back, but also go to the BJJBrick shows with Matt Thornton, and then there's SBG podcast as well. You can't go wrong if you're listening to what that guy has to say. I'll just say, like,
he's just so brilliant, so intelligent, and you know, just the unique perspective he brings. And if I guarantee you, if you just listen to him, read any of his articles, you'll come away that much smarter.
So to kind of wrap up, and I cannot thank you enough, Gary. Like I really, I'm appreciative. I know, like, so had a little bit of situation where I had to come on just a little bit late. I appreciate you for giving me that
no
10 minutes. Yeah. That means a lot. I try to be early. That's the airline pilot in me. Like if I'm late, I just feel like I've failed, you know? So your kindness and just decency, I can't thank you enough for that. Also, just for, you know, like what you guys have done with the show, you guys have made me better. And that's not like podcaster to podcaster. That's, you know, jiu-jitsu guy to jiu-jitsu guy. I'm just really thankful for that. As we've talked about kind of, you know, like what has the show given you? What has jiu-jitsu given you? What are your plans, you know, moving forward with your grappling game, maybe with your teaching, with the show? Like what it could be a selfless, you know, or a selfish plug. I don't care. Just like what do you want to accomplish in the next 5 years? What are you looking forward to? Because I'm 18 years from where you're at, and I want to be looking forward to things then.
Yeah. You know, I guess I'm a pretty basic person. Yeah, I really am. But really, if you listen to my podcast, you know, I talk about this all the time. I just want to have fun. And I always say that if I'm not smiling when I'm on the mat, I shouldn't be on the mat. I don't put any pressure on myself. As you know, I told you earlier, I come from a basketball background, and I treat jiu-jitsu like it's like just going down to the park to play some basketball. I love the people I meet. I just want to meet more people. I want to get better, but I want to have fun. But what I really enjoy is watching my training partners get better. You know, I'm kind of at that point now. You know, I'm kind of like a father figure to a lot of these guys, and I just really like to watch them get better. And that's what, you know, feeds me. I love, you know, if they enter a tournament, I love going there and, you know, watching them get better. If they don't want to enter a tournament, I just love watching them get better. But I just love hanging out with everybody and talking jiu-jitsu and just, I always say, like, you were talking about, you train with a lot of police officers, and every Saturday I train at the Wichita Police Academy, and, you know, with just a bunch of police officers. But I always joke, you know, it's kind of like a big open mat. It's really just police officers and firefighters, and somehow I got invited. I always think of it as it's a big social club where some jiu-jitsu breaks out. And,
Yeah.
that's what I like. It's just like a bunch of guys getting together to play some pickup basketball, to bust on each other, to, submit each other and razz each other. And, maybe afterwards, go to lunch or something. That's really all I want to do is I want to have fun and I want to train safely.
Well, for those of our guests here and listeners who like what you had to say and want to find out more about you, how would they look you up? There's obviously BJJBrick.com, and then you guys are available on iTunes and I'm sure Google Podcasts and all that. But specific to Gary, like how would they find you?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me, first of all, if you're ever in town, Wichita, Kansas. Not a lot of people get to Wichita, Kansas, but for some reason, if you do,
Wichita's a great overnight. Like Wichita and Omaha are two of the best overnights in the Midwest.
Yeah. Yep. So, but if you do get out here, get a hold of me. I'd love to train. You can hit me up on Facebook, Gary Hull, Hull, and I'd love to train if you make it through here, or call me any questions. But I'm just honored for Harrison to give me a call and want me to be on the Old Rollers podcast because I am an old roller, and I love what you're doing with the podcast. I mean, it's an area like we talked about a little bit ago that we need help. We need to be able to train smart. We need to be able to keep our ligaments strong. We need to, practice good hygiene, good diet, good nutrition. Yeah, we need good hygiene too.
You filthy bastards.
Yeah, we don't want to get MRSA on the mat. But I want to keep rolling. Well into my 80s, well into my 90s, if I, I'm lucky enough to make it that part. And a podcast like this is going to definitely help me. And not only that, it's going to get me better at jiu-jitsu. So, win-win situation.
Well, we certainly hope so. Once again, can't thank you enough for joining the show.
I appreciate it.